absolutely. Yeah. But my experience, I did a session on Thursday last week and took the cues for Jeremy preparation. It's an experiment. Fortunately, I know most of those people relatively well.
Right, so it helps.
With them. And but they're salespeople, and it could have easily been a disaster.
But it wasn't. Look at it.
Within minutes, they were into it. Which
I
was like, oh, okay, right. And they were all looking at their cards.
Yeah.
After we'd started, we did the exercise, warmed up. And it didn't take long, to be honest, before they were really, yep, this is my 5, this is my 5. Yeah.
But I think it's because it's framed. So I don't know how much agile you've done in terms of sort of mindset and ways of working, but that's why I really like the emotional culture deck, because the agile discussion is, okay, we know how to be a Scrum Master, we know how to do Kanban, we've got it. Yeah. We've trained everyone in Scrum, we're not doing waterfall anymore, and then they don't look at the culture bit, and you're just like, okay, but how are people reacting? Oh, they don't want to do it. Okay, and so we just let them sit there and not want to do it. And I think, the minute you give them something tangible to actually express themselves, it's really quite powerful in terms of what simple cards and stuff like that can do to that working environment where people are actually just dying to talk about it, they just don't dare.
Absolutely.
That's my feedback. My feedback on your emotional culture deck so far.
Well, you're both my ultimate advocates right now. You're selling it for me, even though I'm not here to sell it to you.
Record it.
Yeah. There's some really good stuff there. I'm so happy you said that people don't dare to have it because they don't know how, and that's the thing that I've experienced over the last 2 and a bit years or 3 years is that people want to have the conversation, they just don't know how to have it, and when it's unlocked, then it just comes pouring out of them. Yeah.
But I think they also feel that they're not allowed.
Yeah.
It's the whole emotion thing of, it's about how much you deliver. It's not about what you feel.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big step for all businesses. I mean, obviously I work in France, so there's sort of cultural differences with Anglo-Saxon models and stuff, but humans are what they are. And I think giving people permission as well as a space, like you said, Andrew.
And the permission, the permission thing's a really big one as well, which is why I call it a game.
Yeah, it's huge.
When I'm talking about it with people or to prospective clients or customers, I say don't be afraid to call it a game when you're talking about it, because when you use the language game and experiment, it lowers people's aversions or people's barriers to it, and they lean in a little bit, going, "Oh, I like to play a game," rather than we're going to go through this convoluted process to talk about your feelings and etc. etc.
No, because it's safer then, isn't it? It's safer to say, "Oh, it's just a game."
Yeah, exactly.
I actually haven't done the leadership part with the MD of this company before, and I made a choice not to, because I had a meeting with him the day before, and I had the deck with me.
Right.
I just didn't think he was ready, I guess. And so the next day we went into that session together, and I think he got sort of 10 minutes into it going, "Oh, what's happening here?" These people are actually starting to tell me something which, and he didn't really know what to expect, obviously, but that was really interesting to observe. Yeah.
I think it's interesting when I'm using it with a multinational team where there's a mix of generations, a mix of nationalities, and a mix of expectations. And some of them were like, "Oh, I don't talk about emotions." Okay. But when you put the sort of game in there, they're like, "Oh, how do you play? Oh, hang on, let me have a go." And it's quite interesting because then you get down to the real, "Oh, yeah, we do have a problem with conflict, actually."
Yeah.
Because it makes me feel like this. Wow. Okay. Yeah, I like it for that. It's really it's a safe place. I also think it's about the masks you wear at work. So I do think the fact that it's a game means that people take a mask on that they don't normally have, and they feel that it's okay to be that person, and they'll express themselves. Then they step back from it and go, "Yeah, well, I mean, that was a game, wasn't it?" but they've sort of taken their mask off, which, if you're looking at bias and inclusion and creating a culture of feedback, is a very important point that normally they don't want to talk about. So that's why I like it as well. And the canvases come to complement that, because I work with quite a lot of sort of manufacturing industries and engineers, and people who are formatted like this. So if you give them a canvas, they're like, oh, okay, I've got a structure. I can deal with it now. I'll just put my emotions into boxes, which is a first step in the right direction.
Yeah. Hey, Suzie, maybe this is a pretty freestyle type session. These other people aren't turning up, so it's going to be us three, which is cool.
That's a 3-point conversation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's perfect. It's worked out perfectly. Do you want to quickly, because I don't know too much about how you're using it, but you could quickly share how you've been using it, and that'll give Andrew some context as well, I imagine, as he's starting on the journey, because it sounds like you're a little bit further along the road than Andrew in the sense of how much you've used it.
Okay, so basically, I've used it. I've also customized some of it to what I already had.
Nice.
But I looked at what I really liked was over and above the cards was the canvas that comes to give it a safe structure. And I tend to use the cards sort of as an icebreaker. So I do an icebreaker that's about naming your emotions, what do you feel, what do you think, personal values, that type of thing. But I keep it as an icebreaker because they all think it's like fluffy stuff. Okay. And then normally I go into something, if I'm working with large organizations or institutions, I go into something a little bit more visionary in terms of business objectives, so where they want to get and where they want to go. And I split that into what does it look like? What does it feel like? So the structure, then, what does it feel like? When you've got top executive teams, they're like, oh, it feels good. No, you're not allowed good or bad. I want other adjectives. What does it feel like? Yeah. And then it's, what impact are you having? So what would you like to measure? And then they're in a sort of comfort zone of, oh, well, we want to measure this. And then I come back and get the canvas out and say, right, I just want to come back to the emotional discussion, but I don't call it an emotional discussion, the icebreaker stuff. Here's a card deck. Now, this is a game, guys. And they'll go, oh, okay, cool. And they sit down and then I give it to them. And then they start, and I said, you just think about, business objectives, what you're delivering, what you felt about it, how the team is functional or dysfunctional, depending, and how you feel on a daily basis. You can't expect your people to come to you unless you are willing to accept, that discussion. And to have that discussion, you have to create a space. And how do you create that space? And they don't know. Oh, we hire coaches. I said, okay, but let's say you have no more coaches. You can't hire them. How do you create that space? Yeah. Well, it's sort of a scary blank page. And I said, okay, what about this? And then I put the game on the table. And then they get quite into it because, and I said to them, this is a safe space. There's just the team and me. And I want you to use the canvas to help you think in the same way that constraints help innovation. I want you to think about framing emotions that you don't know how to name yet. And that's how I use it, especially with top teams. It's with middle management and top teams, I use it like that.
What's the biggest surprise you've found, Suzie, when using it with your clients?
I think the biggest surprise is how quickly they've come around to talking about what I really want to talk about, which is the emotional discussion. Yeah. We're doing the second session at the end of May, but I did the first session with this team, very alpha male, but very sort of left brain, very, we need to deliver this, and this. And the real issues are dialogue, feedback, trust, and the usual leadership issues. And so I thought, how am I going to get them to talk about it? Because whenever I ask them in individual interviews, they're like, yeah, well, the issue is really, it's the market rates. Oh, it's the budget. And I was like, okay. So I said to them, okay, this is a safe space, and you might not find this comfortable or funny, but bear with me for 90 minutes. And that's what I'm asking as an engagement from you. And so they sort of sat down, willingly or not, and I put the culture, and they're like, yeah, right. And then within 10 minutes, they were all engaged. Whether they agreed or not is something different. But they were all in discussion where they were like, no, you don't really feel that. No, how can you say that? And I thought, okay, so, and I was just surprised by how quickly they got into a discussion about it. Yeah.
And I think it's because of, I personally think it's so much to do with physiology, or psychology, obviously, but you can't suppress, hormones at the end of the day. So once that starts flowing, they're like, okay, right, as much as I want to stop this, I can't. And what have you found? what's been the biggest change from the people you work with from starting the process to now? What have they implemented? What have they changed? Have you got a sense of
that? It's a little bit early, apart from one guy I went to see today who has actually put up a mood board with like smiley emojis on it, because they're from a production environment, so they have lean and SQCDP. And I said, okay, what about your people? Oh, we have people under P. Okay. Number of people absent. Okay. How do you think they feel? I don't know. So, okay, let me just leave that with you. Anyway, he came up and said, he sent me a picture and said, since that emotional thingy game, I've got these emojis on my board. So for me, the first step of getting him to understand that that's massively important, especially in a production environment. I had a big almost bottle of champagne moment. I was like, yes, because that's what I was looking for, was for him to own it and do something with what he learned from the culture deck. And of course, diversity of profile and environment means that won't be the same, but that's the strongest sort of reaction I've had so far in terms of applying it.
Okay, cool.
Just
because I've had
just quickly on that, I'm just going to share my screen and show you something that I was going to send this out in the monthly broadcast that comes out soon. But Jakub Jurkovic, he's one of our pro elephant riders. He works at Air New Zealand as an agile coach. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Yeah. So he worked with his teams, and he's going through this.
Cool.
He's because he's an agile coach, he visualizes everything, and this is similar to, I imagine, what you're talking about then, Suzie. But there was about 3 squads, so a tribe. I think he called it. It was either 3 tribes or 3 squads, but they worked together to come up with these 6. They broke the rules and put 6, had 6, which I liked. And now once every 3 months, they're going through and they're putting a marker on where they feel, from 1 not feeling it very much to 5 feeling it a lot.
Yeah, great.
Cool.
And
that's really cool.
Visually, if you stand back for that, I imagine you can see a little bit of a pattern. There's some outliers, obviously, but that's a little snapshot for how they're starting to monitor and measure, which is really cool.
Obviously I live in a different country, and the cultural model around emotions is very different in France. So I use it in different ways. I use it in different ways because I know I won't get there with the direct sort of pragmatic discussion that Anglo-Saxons can have around that. It won't work in certain environments. So that's also massively interesting for me to use it in a multinational context and think, okay, over and above translating the questions into French, which is the easy part, it's, how do I get them to culturally have that game? Because there's a lot more context to their culture than there is to ours in terms of how you look, status, identification in the organisation. And so, you're talking 2 workshops down the line, but it's interesting to see how you can use it in different national cultures, I think.
What's some of the other cultural differences you've found, Suzie?
I think, so they're not using their first language. So when you talk about emotions and you're using your second language, obviously it's a little bit different. But the French working culture is very hierarchical. It's very status-driven. It's very elitist. And obviously that's changing because it has to. But, if you get to the top of organizations here, it's forget emotions. They don't even talk about mistakes, or they don't talk about anything apart from how good they are and what they've delivered. It's a little bit black and white, but it's more or less like that. And there aren't really women at the top, so you don't have that interaction around emotional intelligence. So they talk about it and they put collaboration programs out there and they pay for coaches, but they're not walking the talk yet. And that's why I like the emotional culture deck, because they're working in English, which gives them a certain distance from who they are, because it's their second language. So that's already, they're in sort of like one of their masks has gone, and if I get them into a safe enough space, they will do it. But I think the follow-up to that is very different, and you need a lot more context to the communication around it. Like, I've had pre-workshops and work just to put the culture deck on the table. And I've told them what it is right from the beginning. They're like, well, let me have a look at it with my right hand and his right hand, and then we'll see if we're going to use it. So you have to go through this whole thing, or and every time it's like, this is a safe space. It doesn't matter what you say, but they're just not they just don't have the same cultural codes, and they don't laugh at themselves. And if you laugh at work, you're not serious. And there's loads of sort of stereotypical stuff. You know, and I used it with some Germans the other day, which is quite interesting as well. Completely different approach, and you know, it was like, oh, Germans, they've got no humour. They won't. Yes and no. You know, we had a pre-workshop. They weren't very keen, but they said, okay, do it anyway. Otherwise, we can't say we're being disruptive. Okay. And finally, we got there, and we got there quicker than the French.
Yeah.
Which I wasn't massively surprised about.
So, Suzie, just on that, how you approach it, do you ever frame the exercise? I assume you do for your ongoing work, but do you frame the exercise with a commercial outcome that they go, oh yeah, actually I do want that. Yes and yes.
I was going to say yes and no, but it's yes and yes really. So I frame it. I frame it as future of work in terms of the skills that are coming in digitalization. So the more connected and digitalized you become, the more we need what keeps us human, and that's what they don't want to talk about. Yeah. But if you look at the sort of the war for talent or the gig economy, or you know, I use competitive advantage from a human capital point of view to address the emotional culture deck before I go into inclusive culture, because they get with we need talent, they get with we need to retain competitive advantage, and it's through human capital, and that all these digital tools are making collaboration so easy, but they're also taking away a human element that we massively need if we want to stay relevant in the markets that are changing exponentially anyway. So, you know, the whole discussion around diversifying the workforce in terms of profile and attitude being more important than schools and things like that is the way I approach it. And one of those two approaches, whether it's talent or competitive advantage or both, the future of work gets them sitting up and listening to what I've got to say without saying, you know, oh, do you need to speak to HR? No, because everyone thinks talent is a HR issue. It's not. It's a business. It's a business imperative. So I want everyone around the table, not just head of HR. Otherwise, I'd just go and see the head of HR. But that's when the emotional culture game discussion is interesting, because culture changes HR in most organizations, but business culture isn't. So I'm careful with the words that I use. I mean, especially in France where things are quite siloed. Oh, HR do this and that. And I was like, okay, but I'm a manager. I need to know what talent I've got. Then you ask HR. No, that's an old model. And I've got something that can prove to you, but it's an old model. But I think, you know, I think that they need convincing. And I sort of, depending on who, I either go from it as I'm going to convince you, or we all know that this is an issue. How about I help you think about it? So one of the two areas.
So coming from a recruitment background, I see they're very driven on numbers, like probably a lot of the organisations you're dealing with. So performance, using it, any advantage you can have to improve performance, obviously it's there. But from a business owner's point of view, as you say, the war for talent, well, that's the talent one, it's done. So it's all about retention in that respect. So, and everyone is trying to figure out how to retain.
But if I look at new business models, products and services, and data platforming, it's everybody's issue. And so what does that? And we're back to the discussion about one size doesn't fit all. But data platforming will take away your silos and any type of territorial leadership you have in your organization. Not straight away, but it's going to challenge that massively. So to have those courageous conversations, you need to be equipped to understand emotional triggers and have a feedback discussion. And that's when they'll sit there and go, oh, yeah, we're not very good at that. Okay. So why don't we try something to get you better at that? And then they're quite open to it. I was interested in how other people used it.
Okay.
Obviously, I use it in the way I think is appropriate and blah, blah, blah. But I'd be interested in other case studies of how it's worked, where it's worked, and what it's done, and also updates on what you're doing with it. So the fact it's going to be translated into French is massively interesting for me.
Yeah, cool.
Those type of things.
Yeah. The three main ways that I'm noticing people using it, and the way I'm using it now, in its simplest form, the most common way of people using it is in that retrospective conversation, in the weekly retro.
Yeah. Okay.
And for two reasons. Maybe one, because when I talk to people when they're first using it and they ask, how do I get better at using it? I tell them the bad news, unfortunately, is that you've got to learn by doing, and you can't theorize about the best way to use it. So the best way to do that is to try the retro conversation, because it's a really small, non-threatening, simple exercise to run. So that is one of the core ways, and there's a lot of companies who are having heaps of success just literally adopting it in that way.
Yeah. It's a massive first step.
Yeah, massive first step, and it's an easy way to introduce people to it. And with that as well, if you do end up using it more in that way, with teams where the psychological safety isn't great, sometimes people are just holding up the card to start with. So they're not actually, I've just used that as an example, they're not going to the stage of sharing the full story, but they're just holding it up and then looking around the room to see who else might be holding up something similar or what the other cards are. And over time, they're starting to share the story about the unpleasant one more than the positive one. The other one that I'm hearing more and more stories about recently, and I'm doing this as well, is using the deck from a leadership charter perspective. So how we create a team leadership charter. So going through with a leadership team, upwards of 30. The latest story is about a woman at Sanford, who's a big fishery company here in New Zealand. And they ran it with a whole bunch of really left-brain fisherwoman leaders. And they went through the leadership blueprint to create the leadership charter off the back of that. So all the content that was taken from that, they then pulled out and turned into their leadership charter.
Oh, cool.
So that's a really, really cool way. And that's also how I've been using it. So I was excited that she did that as well. So at the end of that session, as a leadership team of 30 people, they decided the 5 things they wanted their people to feel and the 5 things that they absolutely didn't want their people to feel, and then how they were going to behave as a leadership team. So the leadership charter for the leadership team, which is great. And then the success that I'm having with it is running the Map Your Emotional Culture workshop.
Yeah.
And that's the majority of the way that I use it, to be honest.
Okay.
I think it's easier probably from a time perspective, from a facilitation perspective, to run the leadership workshop and create a leadership charter. It's more difficult to run the Map Your Emotional Culture workshop because there's more intricacies, complexity. There's also a bit more fear as well. When I was running the session on Tuesday last week with 30 people in the room going, what if they can't come to a top 5? And so I had to overcome my own fear of that as well and just trust the process. And it turned out they quite easily came to a top 5.
Yeah,
and so,
I found that too the other day.
Yeah.
But I noticed your video on the customer experience deck. So from my point of view, because the companies tend to be smaller, you can probably cut through and get things moving internally relatively quickly. And then they get some enthusiasm and potentially, hopefully, some change, obviously. But then the power of what they could do, the possibility of what they could do with a customer is probably one of the next steps to, it probably feeds into how they want to feel at work. It gives them a disruptive sort of tool to go, wow, our competitors are not doing this.
Yeah.
Which most of them won't be. But
yeah,
where's that in the journey?
So we're going to be launching that. It's right here, actually. We're going to be launching that in July. I'm putting that out into the world via Kickstarter. I'm trying something new, and we'll see if that increases the ability to get it to more people and change the conversations. Interestingly enough, in a project I ran early on, so at about version 4 of this deck, right? Because this is version 14 before I started selling it online. At version 4, I was fortunate enough to work with a company who paid me, actually. It was a paid gig to roll out the deck, a 30-person company here, digital marketing company, to roll out the deck with them. And they ended up coming up with a list of top 3 for each. The top 3 things they wanted people to feel. And everybody decided we wanted to feel, and the top 3 things we didn't want people to feel. And it turned out that those 3 things on either side of those lists were the exact things they wanted their clients to feel and not feel. And it was a real aha moment for them, because they went, wow, okay, we want our people to feel that, but we also want our clients to feel that. Okay, now what does that mean for our clients' experience? And we don't want our people to feel these things, but we also don't want our clients to feel those things. So what does that mean for our client experience? So that was a real aha moment, and it's something to look out for in the sessions you run, to see if that, or even to pose that question to your teams to go, hey, this is what we've said for us, but does that apply, or how might that apply to the relationships with our stakeholders, insert customer, client, whatever the word is, patients, anything. So that's something that I've been exploring and have done with a couple of companies and has come to fruition. So keep an eye out for that, or start to explore that a bit further if you do that. The only other thing which I think might be of interest is, if I've got it here, so the Know Yourself Handbook, which is in the toolkit again. Hearing a lot more stories, and I'm working with a couple clients where the leaders of the team, so everybody in the team has filled out one of these. Have you come across? You've seen this, Suzie?
Yeah.
Yeah. So everybody in the team has got one of these, and now the leader works in their one-to-one sessions with their team members, and they bring this. So it becomes a conversation about, in here you've said you wanted to feel this and not feel this. These are some of your triggers. And they're having a one-to-one check-in with that at the heart of the check-in, which is quite exciting. I didn't expect people to use it in that way, but they are, so that's really exciting to see. Yeah.
I think it's the same. It's giving a frame to something that's hard to discuss.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
Works well. It works really well for people who don't know how to start this conversation.
Yeah.
We'll definitely use cards for one-to-one, for sure.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
And then a couple of people are using them in through the recruitment process.
Yep.
And a bridge version of it, getting people during the recruitment process to pull out the 3 things that they want to feel at work, and then exploring those stories to help them understand them better as a person, what their drivers and motivations are, what their fears are as well when it comes to the I don't want to feel these 3 things, and then hearing them share that story. So
cool.
Interesting.
So that's it.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's exciting. And then I'm also now working. Well, it's in a very rough format. It's on about 90 post-it notes at the moment. Working on an onboarding card game.
Yeah.
So it's going to be more of a conversation starter, but for the onboarding experience, and a really overlooked one for many people, and one that's underestimated. So that's in the pipeline too. We've got a sports version of the deck coming out soon. More and more sports teams are using it, which is really exciting, and I'm using it with professional sports teams. But the language in here about work and employee doesn't quite fit the sports conversation. Yeah. And then I'm looking at the moment for somebody to team up with in the education sector, because more and more people are using it with kids in high school, about the high school range, 12 to 17.
Brilliant.
And there's some charitable organisation in New Zealand here called Canteen, who help kids with their journey, or not just kids, but people with their journey with cancer. And they've been using it with their youth leaders. So there's a real opportunity to create a version of it to help a youth conversation, however that might be. So
absolutely,
all these things are coming from feedback from clients as well. So it's crowdsourced in that sense, the ideas.